Greetings, fellow Earthlings, and welcome to the Space Times Podcast. I'm Paul Mayer, here with Harrison Lambert, excited to talk to you about all the news and happenings in space this week. This time around, that includes updates and news from the space situational awareness, geospatial, and launch industries, as well as a special interview from guest Tjorven Delabie, CEO of Arcsec. In addition, we've also got our usual assorted business and technological advances. We hope you will enjoy this week's episode. Drop us a comment, check out our socials, and please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're receiving this signal.
This week, we have some more advances in the space situational awareness market. A company called EraDrive out of Stanford University has developed software and hardware for satellite autonomy. They raised a $5.3 million seed round led by Haystack Ventures, with additional participation from Point 9, Harpoon Ventures, Brave Capital, 2100 VC, and Entropy Industrial Capital. Lots of interest in this kind of technology. This is a fairly unique approach to it. They're using a single sensor to do proximity operations, but with the kind of express interest of using this for space situational awareness. So usually this means mapping out objects in orbit. Typically, this is done by the Space Force to keep track of all the satellites. In this case, EraDrive seems most interested in this sort of defense application towards satellites, keeping an awareness of the area around them to ward off any enemy actors that might come up to our satellites and interact with them. But certainly applications to just general space domain awareness, tracking space objects, and potentially rendezvous proximity operations, which is the robotic kind of docking, berthing approach between multiple objects in space industry, which has had a really cool advancement at the same time from Starfish Space, who had been flying a payload on top of the Impulse Space Mira spacecraft that had launched on TR-15. They very quickly were able to demo an RPO mission called Remora, and this brought the Mira spacecraft to within 1,250 mirrors of another spacecraft. This is very close. So they're operating in like near field activities rather than orbital trajectories. And I found this one really fascinating because, Mira is a orbital transfer vehicle, and Starfish Space has their own spacecraft, but they decided to put their payloads on here. And the payload actually interacts with Mira by being able to send it commands to use its thrusters to move it around, which is a really interesting capability to have two different companies interacting so tightly in the flight software. But the way they broke it down makes a lot of sense. The sensor itself is able to detect the other spacecraft and then generate the thrust commands and then send those over. So rather than having the spacecraft decide what it needs to do to approach the object being detected, it's able to get very clear commands from something that's kind of calculating at the edge. I think having this partnership is going to be a really neat step forward for them, especially having an orbital tug vehicle having this RPO capability. It also reminds me very much of Momentus with their Vigoride 7 spacecraft. They have an orbit fab sensor on there and are planning to do something very similar next year. So it'll be an interesting race between these companies to see who can operationalize this capability.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how Starfish Space has, one, recovered from that massive tumble at their initial launch of, I believe, the Otter Pup, and two, made such progress that they are able to successfully hit that almost the 1 kilometer mark and demo that capability in Remora, effectively while piloting the host satellite themselves to do so. Super impressive stuff. And like you mentioned, EraDrive coming out of Stanford, they are one of several companies out of the Bay Area that are looking at automating more of the operational and software and helping to autonomize the satellite operations portion of missions, which is hugely dependent on situational awareness and domain awareness whilst on orbit.
Yeah, and I think
the fact that all of this is happening in conjunction and simultaneously is indicative that we've really sort of turned the page, and RPO is about to previously the RPO and on-orbit services industries have been largely science fiction, and they're rapidly becoming reality as the capabilities that are underpinned by a robust space situational awareness layer are rapidly maturing and becoming more feasible.
Yeah, and AirDrive was talking about using some unique sensors to do this. I know a lot of RPO companies that have been approaching this problem have had to go the route of like stereoscopic cameras or laser LiDAR systems to kind of get that depth of field. So it's really fascinating to see a couple companies come out this week saying they can do it with a single camera. And I know EraDrive was talking about using star trackers to do this sort of capability, which is great because we were able to sit down with Tjorven Delabie, the CEO of Arcsec. This is a company that's been using star trackers to track space objects for quite some time. They've built out a map of space debris with their star tracker. And they've actually partnered last month, and we covered this last month, with Neurospace to start generating some AI-driven results from that. It was a really fascinating conversation with him. I think he gave us a lot of insight into where this market's going, and kind of the technological hurdles to still figure out, and kind of where the business demand is coming from. So we're going to cut to that interview now and add some more color to this industry, this rapidly growing industry.
Well, Tjorven, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for joining us. Harrison and I are excited to chat with you and learn a little bit more about Arcsec and everything that you're doing in the industry. So,
thanks for having me.
As a founder, your company is fairly unique. You came directly out of university research, and you never really needed to raise any private capital, especially making hardware in space, a famously capital-intensive industry. So tell us a little bit about your unique journey, how you got to sort of where you are and how you managed to create a successful bootstrap business in the most capital-intensive industry in the world.
Yeah, so I started at university. First I did engineering, aerospace and space engineering. Then I did a PhD on Star Tracker algorithms, then a 2-year postdoc. And during that postdoc, we developed a full ADCS for an ESA in-orbit demonstration CubeSat called Sigma. And so the main reason I would say that we were able to start our company Arcsec by being completely bootstrapped is because we had this journey through the university where we already developed technology, where we had made a first system that actually flew in the first year that we founded Arcsec. And then I just think that we were also entering the market at the correct time where a lot of people were starting to launch their first satellites. So there was room for a new player to come in. So we were able to sell Star Trackers actually from the first year that we were operational. So we were profitable from the first year already. And we have remained since, and we haven't looked for external capital, just strap our way here.
Very impressive. So if I'm hearing you correctly, when you took your research from university, you already had paying customers lined up.
We, not yet. So we knew that there was traction. We knew that people were interested, but we took the leap lightly before we had actual first contracts in. We had a project at the university with ESA, but that's not really a commercial customer, of course. And then a few months after we started, the few first actual contracts started coming in. They weren't even the ones that we had envisioned that would come first when we started the company. But that's how it slowly started building up.
You and Neurospace are working together on the most high fidelity map of space debris on the market, able to image and track debris as small as 3 centimeters in diameter. How do you think this debris map will change and mature the space ecosystem?
What we realized after a while is that with these Star Trackers that we're selling, so we're mainly an attitude determination and control system company, that you can also detect space debris. And the main strength of it is that every satellite already has, or almost all of them have, a Star Tracker on board. So you can just open the eyes of a network that's already there, you could say. Now, how it changes the industry at the moment, right? I think most people who listen to this will be aware of the issue of space debris, and that it's not just a theoretical issue, but that it has practical implications, that it has potential to go completely wrong as well. So there is action that it's taken. And to do that, you need to know where the space debris is so that you can either avoid it or in some cases go and retrieve it and recycle it or remove it. And so far that mainly happens from ground-based observations, which have a few downsides in the sense that they have certain geographical locations. They can't always observe, especially if they're optical. So there are some geographical and also time gaps. Well, in the end, what you need is a debris map with high spatial and temporal resolution. So that's what we would be able to deliver if we have a very large sensor network of star trackers that are in space and constantly searching for debris while the star tracker is also doing its primary functionality. And the advantage there is that if you have this map with high spatial and temporal resolution, you are much better equipped and much more able to determine the orbits of all the debris elements. You will also be able to detect smaller debris elements, so it will be more complete and more accurate, and allowing to do better space traffic management.
I wanted to jump in here and kind of ask a couple questions about from a technical standpoint. The star trackers that you develop are meant more for far field imaging of stars at a distance. Optics are designed to look at that kind of distance. And I'm curious as to what were the technical challenges of repurposing your sensors to do something that's much closer?
Well, in essence, for the optics, something that's a few tens of meters away is actually already seen as, it's almost equal to infinity. I mean, the optics themselves are quite small. So something at 10 meters is this many times the focal length. So it's almost close to infinity. So we see something that's across the street, for example, if you do some tests with our Star Trek, is already quite sharp. So that's it. In that sense, Star Trek are actually quite well equipped to detect space debris. The challenge that you have is that you need to run your primary functionality, so being a star tracker, determining the attitude, in parallel with detecting and characterizing the space debris. And that's something that, not all star trackers are well equipped to do that. And then you also need to have sufficient computational power and efficient enough algorithms so that you don't negatively impact your primary functionality. Because the moment you start doing that, then customers will be reluctant to buy the star tracker because it's not such a good star tracker anymore. And the whole strength of the concept is that you're basically piggybacking on the star tracker functionality.
What kind of drives the 3 centimeter size there? Is there a distance constraint on how far away you're able to pick up the debris?
Yes. So basically, we need to be able to distinguish the reflected light from this debris element in the background noise. So we need to have a sufficient signal to noise ratio. So there are a few factors that come into play. The closer it is, light you get, the larger it is, and the more reflective it is, the more light you get. And then, of course, we still need to have the sun under the correct angle. And another factor is that the debris is moving, the star tracker itself is moving as well. If both are moving in opposite directions at 7 kilometers per second, it passes through the field of view very quickly, and you will not be able to see it. If it travels along with you, you will be able to see it for a longer time. So what drives it is really all these factors coming together and having a good signal integration.
Does that impact your ability to determine the orbit of the object that you're picking up? Is there any sort of depth of field calculation that you're able to do with your sensors?
No. Basically, we just have this segment of the debris element passing through the field of view, and you are not able to subtract that or able to find the distance from that because it can be a slower moving object floated by or a fast moving object at the distance. The reason how you can still determine the orbit is that only one of those cases will actually make physical sense with Kepler's laws. So that's how you can find the orbit anyway.
I know some of the DDust data that you've already collected was coming from the star trackers you have mounted at the La Palma Observatory. Does the data you collect there translate directly to the data you see on orbit?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've collected quite a few of these debris elements right now. Like I said, we have a star tracker on the La Palma Observatory. So that's basically we screw the star tracker on top of the big telescope tube, and we're just looking along the telescope. A lot of these elements we've then correlated with known debris databases. And so we're able to see that, to identify what we're looking at. So the first object we saw, for example, was this big Japanese satellite, Suzaku satellite. So of course, everything that we're detecting from ground will be like rock bodies or huge satellites, because we have very small optics and we're looking at a very large distance, and there are some other effects that play if you observe from ground. Once we're in orbit, we'll be much closer, and that's where you'll be able to see like down to 3 seconds.
And the data that you're collecting, is it intended to be in a similar format as those catalogs that you're talking about that are already tracking debris? I'm wondering what the integration is with existing space situational awareness capabilities are, like how we currently do conjunction tracking. Are you able to get the same kind of orbit prediction, covariance matrix out of the data that you're collecting?
They're basically, it's in the same format yet. So we have these tracking data messages. And for us as a company, we don't want to go much further than that. So what we basically want to do is deliver these. Yeah, it's basically the time, the position of your observer, and then the angles under which you see the object passing by. And that's what we want to deliver to companies such as Aerospace, for example, then derive services that determine the orbit. So we did it now just to demonstrate that we're actually getting good measurements with this Suzaku satellite, for example. But that's not how far we want to go by implementation. We just want to deliver the raw data. I would say that the main difference with ground-based observations, you would typically pick an object and track along with it. So you will be able to see it for a longer time. In space, we do opportunistic observation, as we call it. So the star tracker is just pointing where it's pointing. So we have no authority to say where it needs to be looking, because otherwise we again interfere with the primary vision. So it will pass through the field of view for a shorter period of time, which is the downside. But on the other hand, you have many more sensors.
Tjorven, help us understand here sort of the bigger picture vision that you have for the space industry over the next, I'll say, decade. By the end of the 2020s, by the mid 2030s, where do you see the market going? What do you see as sort of the state of play in 2030 and 2035, and how does Arcsec fit into that?
Yes, I would be very happy if I would have a really good idea about that. My guess is that, the trend we are seeing at the moment is that there are a lot more satellites being launched, a lot of them by commercial players, companies that didn't even exist 5 years ago are now launching a lot of satellites. At the same time, we're seeing that, I think, due to certain geopolitical things, there's more of a desire to go back to like a certain autonomy for your own. So people launching their own constellations. So what that means for the market, I guess, is that the market is growing, which is nice if you're a supplier of spacecraft components, of course. And the market is also, it's mainly this new space market that is growing, of course. So it's, less stringent requirement than traditional space. Although there as well, you see a little bit of a trend of customers getting more demanding in respect of to environmental requirements, supply chain requirements, elements like that. And then the other thing is, with more satellites entering our orbits, SSA topic will only become more and more important. And then finally, partial space situational awareness. You also have the space domain awareness, or the topic where certain satellites that you don't like as much coming close and inspecting, for example, or interfering with you. So I guess that will also become more important.
So you've got this sort of traditional Star Trek and hardware sales business that you've built out and has largely been the basis of your academic research, and you've now got the unique application of that hardware for the space situational awareness data set and software package that you're able to sell. How do you see those two sides of your business effectively growing over the course of the next 10 years? Are you planning on remaining a hardware business that sells the ADCS solutions primarily, and the data remains sort of a secondary offering, something that helps set you apart and helps you sell software? Or do you view the data set at any point overtaking or becoming co-equal and important with the hardware sales, as, to your point, the needs and importance and value of a thorough SSA and SDA data set become more and more critical across the stack?
It's a good question. It's a question that we've asked ourselves as well. So yeah, we have the regular board meeting, and that's more or less an important question there. The way we see it at the moment is both of them are so yes, we indeed sell ADCS hardware. That's what we originally did. Now we have this SSA aspect, and both are quite different business cases. The one is more hardware related, one is more software related. If you think about it, it's also the case that the customer in the hardware related case is becoming the provider in our other business case. So, and I do think that there's a lot of potential in the SSA case. So it might start growing. I don't know if it would grow beyond what we currently have with our hardware case, because there we currently mainly sell Star Trek. We're now also selling our first reaction. We've been going to full ADCS solution. So that one is also expanding, I would say. It might even be that at some point we maybe not fully legally, but that we split up these two activities in the company a bit more, so that we're having almost like separate entities going forward.
I'd like to dig in a little bit on kind of what that hardware advantage gives you. I know you've sold over 200 units of the Sagittarius Star Tracker. I'm not sure if you can give details on the quantity you sold of your other units, but are these hardware on orbit that you're able to activate once the software is ready? Does it depend on the customer and how willing they are to let you access their hardware? Can you kind of go into how you would roll that out?
Yeah, so we sold more than 200 now. For our other Star Trek, it's slightly below 50, I would say. Of those, because most of them, I mean, our sales curve is rising, and then the curve by which we launch or see objects, systems going up into space, follows that with like a delay of a year and a half or 2 years. That's how long it takes. So now we're seeing more and more of these Star Trek going to space. We have more than 20 in orbit now. And yeah, it's true. If I say we have more than 20 in orbit now, it's not us operating them. So we sell them to our customer. So we need to have arrangements with these customers to be able to get the data down. So what we need to do is to basically convince them that it's useful to get this data down and to store it in a central database. And that's a conversation that some people, some customers, they might downright say no, maybe based on their mission profile, or that based on the fact that sometimes people that we sell to are not the final end user reader. They have their customer who's operating it. What we try to do to make that being picked up as much as possible is, one, make burden as small as possible. So we want to make it run quite seamlessly. Data rate is also something like 400 kilobytes per day that we expected, which is very small for these types of satellites. And we're also setting up this incentive scheme where people can get like monetary incentive or a discount on their Star Trekkers if they agree to send us what we could then call the dust data, so the degree detection using Star Trekker data. And that's something that we're working on more and more now, that our head of growth is working on that to set up the arrangements. And we have a first oral commitment of someone who is willing to do it. And we hope that the others will come quite soon.
And I noticed that most of the talk was about deploying this capability on the Sagitta sensor specifically. Does that preclude the Twinkle and the Scorpio from doing the same?
No, because it's mainly a firmware update, and all three of them that they have different hardware and they're different purposes, but they largely use like the same internal engine, you could say, so the same algorithms. The reason why we're mostly working with Sagitta at the moment is because it's the one that we sold most. So it would have the biggest potential to roll it out on that one.
And what's the potential to implement this technology, the software aspect of it, on star trackers that don't belong to you? Do you see any expansion in that front?
Yes, that's something that we've thought about. It's not super straightforward. It could potentially be done, but there are a few techniques that other star trackers use that will actually make it very difficult to implement this. So that there are quite a few star trackers that make their algorithm more efficient by obtaining a first initial attitude, and then from that point onwards, only selecting certain windows in the image frame where they know the stars will be, and then only imaging those and not even reading out the rest of the data. And that way you will never pick up opportunistic space debris because it can pop everywhere on your screen. So for those applications, for example, it would be difficult. There are star trackers who run their algorithms on the onboard computer rather than on the unit itself. You need to then go to the operator and convince them that they need to give up even more space on their onboard computer to have a functionality. And so it's more difficult. So at the moment, we're more focusing on our own hardware.
And kind of to that point, and in relation to your partnership with Neurospace, a lot of their AI processing for ingesting all this data and turning it into a product is done on the ground. Do you see any of that moving to orbit, having a quicker turnaround on processing data, or possibly even using it for the spacecraft itself?
Well, initially I would say no, but I also have a LinkedIn where almost all messages now are about like in space data processor and stuff like that. It could make sense potentially if you have a constellation, for example, and you have your own sensor on board, that you use them for the detection of your own spacecraft without sending stuff up and down. Potentially in the future, it could be. At the moment, in order again to reduce the burden on the operator, you just downlink a little bit of data and do the rest on ground. But that could be in the future.
Awesome. Well, Tjorven, thank you so much for your time. Before we get going here, we want to give you a chance to sort of shout out what you're currently working on and effectively how our listeners could help you out the most. Are you looking at raising any capital for your first round? Are you hiring talent, looking for customers? What do you need? How can we help you?
We're not raising capital at the moment. And also because we're bootstrapped, we like to grow in employees and in like a steady pace. And so far that's working quite well. We're always looking for more customers. So I do think that we have a very interesting product. A shout out otherwise, some topics. I mean, there are some other cool things that we're working on. We're working on the large React field, and that has a magnetic bearing, so that's magnetically levitated. That's pretty cool. We have a mission that's has two of our Twinkle star trackers that's arriving at an asteroid next year, so we're looking forward to that. But apart, we're doing a lot of fun stuff. But apart from that, not really any other topics I want to raise.
Those are some awesome projects, though.
Yeah, quite cool.
Well, Tjorven, thank you so much for your time. We're always happy to have wonderful, fascinating conversations, and this has certainly been one of them. So we're grateful for showing up on the Space Times podcast and for giving us so much of your afternoon from Belgium. But in case we don't get the chance to touch base again, happy holidays, happy New Year, and our best to you and your continued success.
Yeah, all the same for you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Tjorven.
Super grateful again for Tjorven's time. Fascinating conversation. One of the things that I thought was most interesting about it was the sheer magnitude of demand that they're experiencing sort of throughout the entirety of the industry. There's a lot of folks who are interested in these plug and play easy star tracker application to supplement serve as the baseline for their SSA solutions. And the fact that that's coming from such a varied and wide pool of interested parties, I think is very telling.
Yeah, I think I've heard this exact proposition come up a couple times in the past year just in my work. And I've always told the people, like, unless you can partner with the star tracker provider, this is not something you can do. Like, most star trackers don't spit out an image, they spit out a quaternion to guide your guidance navigation computer. So to have a provider actually figure out the software to make this star tracker work, not just as a star tracker, but also as a space object tracking device, is incredible. And the fact that they already have hundreds of these deployed on orbit, and he's saying that it's essentially a software update to their hardware that allows them to do this sort of capability, is incredible. And I think that, the fact that they could potentially move some of this AI that Neurospace is integrating up to the spacecraft would enable the kind of capabilities that we're seeing a lot of other companies talk about. So while, this is certainly positioned as an orbital debris tool, and I welcome that. I love debris tracking, debris removal, any sort of thing that helps us get rid of this debris problem. I think the implications here are beyond that. And we're seeing that reflected a lot throughout the market.
On to geospatial. The biggest announcement, both in impact and in sheer contract value this week, is undoubtedly the joint venture between Rheinmetall and IceEye. They closed a joint venture 1 month ago. IceEye closed a $250 million raise at a $3 billion post-money valuation 1 week ago. This week, they've announced a 1.7 billion euro contract with the German Bundeswehr, which $2 million US, good starting, or $2 billion US, good starting point. That's the starting point for this contract. It can extend, and so that $2 billion price tag is expected to go up as IceEye and Rheinmetall execute, and the demand continues to be there. So just a massive win for both of these companies.
Yeah, I think this now makes up like 20% of Finland's GDP just from IceEye, right?
I would not be surprised if that were the case at all. But this is very much in line with everything that we've been discussing with regards to the demands for synthetic aperture radar data as they pertain to defense interests. And so this contract between Finland and Germany, companies representing both nations, both of these companies have explicitly attempted to boost their SAR capabilities earlier this year. This has been a signaled interest for both of these nations and both of these companies, primarily because of concerns with Russia's geopolitical position. And so we're seeing this play out in real time. There are a lot of really clear implications of this contract that Europe as a whole is very intent on standing up their own commercial and their own defense sovereign space capabilities, and that they truly do view the Eastern Front as a danger or potential threat. In other news, Hawkeye 360 announced a $150 million Series E raise. And this financing round is a combination of equity and debt. It's led by Night Dragon and Center 15 Capital. And it's largely raised in order to acquire the innovative signal analysis defense contractor for improved data processing and insights. So Hawkeye 360, they've been a little bit active this year. There have been a couple of announcements regarding raises and acquisitions that they've made. This is another acquisition on the year, vertically integrating, going into the data insights, into the AI capabilities, building on top of their hardware and software capabilities already. So nothing out of the ordinary or crazy on this, but a big accomplishment on their end either way. And finally, Vantor has partnered with Niantic Spatial on a GPS-free navigation for the defense market. So Niantic has a visual pointing system, VPS, that effectively, with a camera, is able to map your location relative to a detailed visual map already. And Vantor's aerial-focused Raptor VPS complements that well. So what we're seeing is and the article, the press release called out that it's sort of region specific. So we're seeing, we'll say, zip code or county-wide maps in great detail being deployed in the field, and these VPS systems are able to accurately identify an operator or an asset's position in a completely GPS denied environment based purely on the images that they see, referencing the onboard map and the onboard computer that they have.
And I think it's a really interesting kind of progression of geospatial capabilities that's been laid out here this week. The IceEye is generating a lot of money off of their core competency, which is star satellites. But we've talked about them quite a lot these past couple of months, and they're growing all over the place. This is pretty pure play contracts, just put up more satellites, but they have their partnerships in Southeast Asia. They've been working on kind of next generation of their satellites, doing some more optical stuff. So it's interesting to see where they're at, given that large $4 billion valuation that we announced a couple weeks ago. But Hawkeye 360 is kind of in a different phase. Buying a signal analysis company to improve their data processing and insights kind of signals that they're at a maturity level, that their core product, their satellites that generate this RF capture, is kind of doing enough that they need to now drive value out of it further in order to bring in more money. It reminds me a lot of when we were at Maxar and they acquired Radiant Solutions. Digital Globe had already been gathering a lot of images, but they had to acquire a software company to drive more value out of them. And now we look at Vantor, which is the new name for Maxar, and they're doing these crazy projects that are just kind of like whole new generation of technology to build on top of what they're already good at. This VPS system is crazy. I mean, the fact that they can use cameras, whether it's on a truck, on a headset, on a phone, on a plane, on their satellites to create a GPS map, is a really neat introduction of a PNT system that's not really been proposed by anybody else. We have companies like Zona that are building out augmentation of PNT systems. There's next generation BeiDou satellites that China are building, but this is a very, very unique approach to it. And I think it's a really neat demonstration of kind of the progression of these imaging RF capture kind of companies, where they have to take what their core value is and build new offerings on top of that. And to kind of tie it back full circle, like this week, Vantor also did another space-to-space capture of a Starlink satellite that I don't want to say blow up. It destructed in some way that generated orbital debris, and they're actually able to take a picture of that satellite and determine the level of destruction of that. And so I think we're seeing that these capabilities can tie back to the space situational awareness sort of thing, and we're creating this more unified system across space, air, ground. And I think a lot of it's being driven by conflict zones in Europe and abroad. But I'm happy that it's leading to some real innovation across all this technology. So in the launch space, we have quite a few pieces of news this week. InnoSpace Hanbit Nano is a South Korean rocket that was planned to launch this week, but scrubbed their launch. Be sure to watch next week as they try again. Hopefully it makes it up this time. This will be an impressive step for South Korea. It'll be their first commercial launcher. They had just recently, as of a couple weeks ago, operationalized the Nuri rocket, which they handed over to government control. So that's a government rocket. That one's been launched 4 times. But within a week, they might have 2 launches where previously they had 0. This is very impressive speed for South Korea and enables them to do a lot of great development in space, and really puts them on the map in terms of countries that have space capabilities. Dutch aerospace and defense tech company Destinus has raised 50 million euros This is on top of several 100 million euros they've raised throughout the year, now at a total of 400 million euros. I found the interesting thing about this is that Destinus is a company that was kind of originally just developed to be a rapid transport for people system. So they wanted to go like Mach 5 in a plane from point A to B, get you from like Tokyo to New York in a couple hours. But it seems that they're pivoting with all this money to go into some of the hypersonics technology, which they've been spending a lot of the money they already raised on developing the airframes, the propulsion systems, testing out all their technology. And it seems that they're pivoting more towards autonomous systems and hypersonics technology, which certainly echoes what we've been seeing in the market recently. Hypersonics has had a huge growth across defense, across transport, across launch vehicles. So this is definitely a pivot that makes sense, and again goes back to this sort of European sovereignty and defense capabilities, and you can see them pouring lots of money into that, including 100 million euros that ESA has committed to the Ariane 6 in order to develop their Asterisk kick stage into an orbital transfer vehicle. So this is their second stage propulsion platform, usually used to inject satellites into orbit, but now they're looking at turning that into an orbital transfer vehicle, which is colloquially called a space tug, and they're used to move satellites from one orbit to another.
Now, we had reported on this on the second stage of the Ariane rocket being a priority being for that stage to become reusable and recyclable. So it's interesting to see that they're supplementing that mandate for, or I guess that goal of reusability into additionally an orbital transfer vehicle that will work and be longer term survivable at the highest altitude possible. So how they're going to go ahead and keep that second stage reusable for multiple different ignitions and storage on orbit is a completely different set of problems to solve from a technical perspective than simply making it a reusable rocket, able to come back, reusable stage, come back and land safely. So I'm super excited and curious to see how they end up executing on this, and whether this is in addition to or in place of the previously stated goal of making that second stage recyclable.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a better value to their next generation rockets. I think in similar fashion to their investments in the Andoya spaceport and the landing system that they're developing there. I think this is just a parallel effort in order to get their whole technology stack put together for their next generation reusable rocket, which is fun to see in comparison to the US, where Astrobotic has won 17.5 million, so a significantly smaller amount from our version of ESA, NASA, and some military contracts to advance their Zodiac and Zogdor platforms, as well as develop 3 new reusable suborbital vehicles. And those will be used for technology demonstrations as well as other applications. What I found interesting about this is that the Zodiac and Zogdor platforms are still around. They're still calling it that. They used to be part of the Maven Space Systems company that got bought by Astrobotic back in 2022 and has formed the kind of core technology of Astrobotic's lunar landers program. So good to see they're still developing that. I guess if they're looking at reusable suborbital vehicles, it could be useful for that too. I think there's still great symbiosis between that kind of development and lunar landers. We don't have atmosphere on the moon, so the problems are very similar to suborbital flight. And being able to develop a lander that can kind of go up and down reusably will both benefit our moon ambitions, as well as on Earth for these technology demonstrators, which we're starting to see are a lot more popular. We've commented on a few companies in the past few weeks that are developing these suborbital platforms. It's something that's always been kind of done, typically for like microwave sounders, like weather satellites, RF testing for like NASA out of Wallops, but it's becoming more and more in demand as hypersonics demand has grown. I think there's a lot of development and just testing that has to go into hypersonics, and everybody's doing it, and everybody's got to figure it out through iteration. So the demand for this kind of technology is growing. I mean, we just talked about Destinus doing hypersonics, and that I would take that as like EU's approach. I know we talked about another company a few weeks ago in the EU doing this as well. But the fact that there's just so many players that are trying to build out this launch vehicle market that hasn't really been the most in demand, the past years as we built out orbital launch vehicles. It's interesting to see some growth here. But on the orbital launch vehicle side, we have a stalwart player at this point, Rocket Lab, firing their Electron rocket into space for two more times this past week, which gets them up to 21 Electron launches this year, which is very impressive. I think it puts them not right behind SpaceX, but I think it puts them in second place. I think SpaceX still has like 100 launches on them, but they've been around a bit longer and they certainly have more money and efforts at it. But 21 launches is very impressive. And the fact that they were turning them around so quickly, they had a couple launches that were 48 hours apart. The other impressive part is that this is a 100% success rate. And the variation in the satellites they're launching is really cool too. I mean, you've got DiskSats, which are kind of a next-gen satellite architecture from Aerospace Corporation that are being tested on this last launch. And then we've got some Starlink satellites for Japan's Institute for Kyushu Pioneers of Spacing. So very exciting for all those companies. Super exciting for Rocket Lab. I can't wait to see how many launches they pull off next year, and hopefully a Neutron launches somewhere in that mix.
Yeah, major milestone for Rocket Lab, getting through almost 24 launches in a year with 100% success rate. And to your point, the sheer variance in the different payloads and assets that they're putting up there on space, those are no small feats to have accomplished. So congratulations to Rocket Lab, both for the success of the Electron launches and their continued growth outside of the launch side of the business. This week, they were announced to have been one of the prime contract beneficiaries of an $816 million contract from the U.S. Space Development Agency, SDA, to design and manufacture 1.5 dozen satellites for the Tracking Layer Tranche 3. Now, Rocket Lab is already involved, I believe, in the Tracking Layer Tranche 2, which is for communication and transport, but the Tracking Layer Tranche 3 is part of the Proliferated Warfighter Space Architecture Program. So the Lightning satellite platform that Rocket Lab is launching is a wide field of view satellite with a Phoenix infrared sensor payload. And it's got the Starlight space protection sensors, which are used on the Lightning satellite platform and also the other competitors who were part of this contract award. So 72 total satellites going up, split between Rocket Lab, Northrop, Lockheed, and L3 Harris. Rocket Lab winning 18 of those 72 for a total of $800 million in base contract value, and then another 10 or 15 million in potential add-ons and awards. Everybody is using the same Starlight space protection sensors, the purpose of which is to protect against electromagnetic or energy attacks effectively. So we're seeing about $40 million a satellite as the price point for the Tracking Layer Tranche 3 assets that are going up sort of across the board. I'd be curious to see whether or not this is more intended to be a resilience play, making sure that we have a lot of different providers that are all able to provide more or less the same capability, or whether SDA is intending to try and use this contract to suss out which of the 4 different major players here, Rocket Lab, Northrop, Lockheed, and L3 Harris, are the actual go-to prime that they want to give the majority of their future business to. But either way, huge contracts and huge awards throughout the space here.
Yeah, I'm really curious to find out more about the Starlight system. I don't think they're going to tell any more about it, but I'm definitely going to be digging into it because this is something like I've never seen before. It's supposed to defend the satellite against direct energy attacks, which I didn't even know was something that was that capable yet. Like, I know people have demoed it, but to be able to use a laser to knock out a satellite is, I'll just say it's not the most common approach. Usually people are a bit more blunt with their anti-satellite missiles and stuff. So the fact that not only Rocket Lab is deploying this, but other companies as well, would seem to indicate that the threat of a direct energy attack is higher than it's been, than it's been obvious from discussion around that particular technology.
Yeah, this is absolutely a security concern that has not materialized in the commercial or private space. yet, but the fact that it's a security concern with regards to national defense is very telling. And again, this is a big win for Rocket Lab, a big follow up on their $500 million award for the same amount of satellites for the transport layer tranche 2.
Yeah. And I think, as you pointed out, the fact that other companies are using this technology points to the fact that Rocket Lab is playing this really smart. They're not just a satellite provider, not just a launch provider, but they're also a component provider. Plenty of people use their Sinclair Sinclair reaction wheels. Plenty of people use their ASI flight software. With this new Starlight component, people are using that. And then they're looking at buying Mynaric for their optical terminals, which I'm sure they used in their tranche 2. So they're bringing in money left and right, and it's great to see for them.
So another big announcement out of the week is that Tower Corp has divested 90% of their AST Space Mobile stake, roughly $159 million, by selling 2.28 million series, or not Series A, but 2.28 million Class A shares. So they still have a handful of residual Class A shares. They still have 200,000 Class A shares remaining. They've got roughly 2 million common units and shares, and that's paired with an equal number of Class B shares as well. So they've got roughly 2.5 million shares left, and that represents just under 1% of the total outstanding Class A stock in the company. So they've got a whole bunch of Class B and LLC units or common shares that they've got sort of in their back pocket. But selling the Class A shares is indicative that the investing company thinks this is a really valuable company today. So they think that AST Space Mobile is doing very well and is overperforming, and that they are looking at an exit, presumably because they think that an exit now is going to provide them more present value than waiting for the sort of longer term service revenue phase of contracts. So in so many words, they think that the valuation of the company and its revenues are only going to continue to grow, but that they've reached a point now where the present value for everything is not necessarily peaked, but the present value of everything is really high, and that the present value of their shares in the company will not grow as fast in the future. So they think that AST has largely sort of hit their stride and is doing very well. So they wanted to get a good liquidation event, and they've done exactly that. Unfortunately for AST and their fellow investors, share prices dropped by about 11% off the news of the announcement. But it's a good day at the office for Tower Corp, and AST Space Mobile has been performing very well. So despite the little bump in market cap, everybody's still doing very well.
Yeah, and can't wait to see them launch their Bluebird satellites next year. They got a design award for it, so I'm looking forward to seeing how it actually performs.
Yeah, Bluebird 6 is going to be a pivotal technical hurdle for them to overcome, but I'm excited to see them knock that out of the park as well. So additionally, the Hungarian communications provider 4IG has agreed to invest $100 million in Axiom Space. So this announcement is a little bit interesting, given that the announcement was made, I believe, earlier this week, a day or two ago. And so here we are on, I believe, December 19th, and 4IG has committed to investing $30 million by the end of the year in Axiom Space, and then an additional $70 million by the end of Q1 26, which is seemingly a really unnaturally fast deployment of capital.
But you mean you don't earn 30 million in 9 days?
You're
up your game, man.
Well, don't forget that 6 of those 9 days are national holidays. So
yeah, I want that for Christmas.
Right. I mean, 10 million a day is a pretty good, makes for a pretty good week at the office, I think. But so what this might sort of be signaling is the fact that so CEO and owner of Axiom Space is well plugged in with the entirety of the space community. And so this is largely reads like an investment for access, and an attempt by 4IG in the Hungarian space industry to get some access into the US space industry by investing in one of these companies that are doing well and growing rapidly and are well connected throughout the industry. And so it's not at all clear what the investment is actually for. There's not stated missions. There's not stated deliverables or contracts announcement. But this has been announced off the back of sort of the non-binding commitment that was explored in October between the two companies, and they've decided to really execute on this in the next couple of weeks here. So we'll see what that winds up looking like longer term. But it feels like Kim Ghaffarian, the previous CEO and current chairperson of Axiom Space, is raising money and making deals and is out there wheeling and dealing without necessarily there being clear outcomes or clear incentives for this. So a little bit odd, but a big announcement nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, they did say it's potentially for the use of orbital data centers, which Axiom has expressed interest in before. It's not really what they're meant to be building for. Like, they're usually talking about space habitats, but it's certainly a big topic in the area. And I'm guessing that he used that as kind of an attractive offer to bring in that money. So that's where a lot of the money's flying to right now. But he also got like $300 million for his modular nuclear reactors a couple weeks ago. So he's just raking in the dollars.
Kim Ghaffarian is doing a very good job of fundraising. I'm still of the opinion that a $100 million investment over the course of 90 days by a mature company in a at this stage purely speculative industry is still atypical.
Yeah.
So props to Kim Ghaffarian and the team, and it'll be fun and exciting to see how Axiom Space follows through and manages everything in the coming years here. A final two quick announcements here from the business moves were that BAE Systems Fast Labs received a $60 million phase 2 contract for their oversight program. And it's an autonomous system that keeps track or maintains quote unquote custody of terrestrial assets. So effectively, it's automated military surveillance for targeted assets. And the Fast Labs implications are that the marginal cost of Earth observation can come down by effectively automating the operations and the tracking of this type of stuff, which to date is a very manual and labor intensive process, needing a person to babysit the satellite and keep track of everything that's happening. So some big implications there. And Starcatcher announced a phase 2 AFWERX simmer in the amount of $1.25 million to advance some orbital power beaming. So friends of the show at Starcatcher are continuing to make progress and grow, and we'd love to see it.
There's some technological advances that went on this week that don't really fit into the business news or other major patterns that we're seeing, but are still cool to talk about. Palo Alto startup Apolink has picked Space to build the radio frequency subsystem for its first relay CubeSat. They are aiming to show how signals can be received from other LEO spacecraft and forwarded to the ground. This is nothing new in space. We constantly send radio signals around. It is a bit unique for LEO. Typically, we don't do relay satellites in LEO outside of like Starlink. But even in those cases, everybody's been moving towards optical data relay systems when we talk about moving data around in LEO. So traditionally, it's constellations like Inmarsat or Iridium that sit in medium Earth orbit and can use RF to kind of relay data around satellites that way. But this looks like they're trying to do it in low Earth orbit. which, it's great to see. I've been espousing the idea of hybrid systems across space domains. So I think adding this sort of layer, which is not as popular or common, would be a great technology to integrate into these optical communication systems and more traditional RF relay systems.
Yeah, there have been a couple of companies that I spoke to and looked at in the IR relay space previously. And Apolink is a new player that is looking to develop and mature that layer of communication and that layer of the tech stack in a way that even some of the other companies that I've looked at and spoken to haven't. And we've spoken recently somewhat about AnySignal, friends of the show, AnySignal. And they're solving similar problems, though AnySignal is at a different, less literal layer of the cake here. And so seeing Apolink explicitly looking at going from LEO to ground looks like they are effectively filling into a similar role that Starlink is filling in, and there's some pretty immediate and pretty big implications for the D2D market as that continues to mature and develop over the coming months.
Metaseismic, a company that creates ultra-thin metamaterial to mitigate vibration of electronics during earthquakes, tested out this technology at NASA Marshall Center on batteries. They were found that it reduces omnidirectional vibration as well as shock, which is great. It works in a smaller form factor than traditional technologies like damping systems like dash pots or non-Newtonian, materials. So this is a great improvement if we can reduce the complexity, the mass, the systems surrounding a lot of electronics and keep them safer during launch. This will make things a lot easier, especially on the launch providers. They don't have to worry so much about breaking the satellites they launch. And maybe you see it used in spin launch where they experience extremely high G forces. This could potentially help them out with launching electronics. Max Space, a startup that has been developing expandable module technologies. Historically, they've been developing the subsystems and the technologies for other companies such as VAST and Axiom. Now is announcing their plans to build their own commercial space station. So this is a sort of pivot for them into the broader technological ecosystem. The unique feature of it is that they can fit the entire habitat onto a single Falcon 9 rocket. So there's no need for on-orbit assembly like the ISS was or some of these larger private space stations are proposing, which makes for a pretty unique value proposition. I would assume that it's able to integrate together with other Thunderbirds, which is the name of this habitat, to create larger structures. But being able to launch a full structure in one rocket is certainly a useful tool to add to the potential for crewed habitats on orbit once the ISS retires in 2030.
Well, that will do it for this week's review of the space industry. We hope you enjoyed the episode as much as we did. And we are, again, incredibly grateful to Tjorven Delabie for joining us for this week's conversation. Again, please drop us a comment, check out our socials, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're receiving this signal. Until next time, this has been Paul Mayer with Harrison Lambert. We're signing off for now.